The night my brother raised his glass, I realized the house I'd fought to protect was about to be stolen again. My name is Vivian Barnes, and what began as a birthday toast turned into a declaration of war over the only home my family had left. Under the warm Kansas sky, I uncovered lies buried under mortgage papers and love twisted into greed. Some betrayals happen quietly until someone decides to speak. Like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We always appreciate the time you spent here with us. Dusk folds over Maple Street like a sheet pulled tight. Cicadas argue from the elms and paper lanterns bump softly above our porch. I shoulder the screen door and ease a sheet cake into the living room, 65. "Looks good," Dad piped in wobbly buttercream. The house smells like baked beans, lemon oil, and that clean hospital sting that never quite leaves the hallway where the walker waits. Mom Lydia straightens place cards no one will read, mouth set as if order could be enforced by font. Dad Walter sits up in his recliner Sunday shirt, buttoned all the way tie a little crooked, the grin of a man determined to be the occasion and not the patient. I have lived here 2 years. I call it temporary, the way travelers say just passing through after they buy a mailbox. After Tyler Quinn contractor charm unfinished jobs, I came home for a while. A while became calendars taped to the fridge, PT at 8 meds at noon, vitals after dinner. I cook, drive, fight, insurance holds, keep the lights on when bills slip through places pride won't look. I design brand kits at the dining room table and send files at 2 a.m. Lydia praises my little projects, the way you compliment a child's macaroni art and then fold it into a drawer. By 6, the house is loud, cousins, neighbors, covered dishes, someone asking where the good ice is. I move like staff topping off tea steering bodies away from the oxygen machine, keeping the fan from launching napkins into the deviled eggs. Dad squeezes my hand when I pass. That squeeze is our code, I see you. When he's tired, he presses twice. Tonight, once. The door opens and a gust of cologne and confidence strolls in 5 minutes late. Graham, my older brother, knows 5 minutes late reads in demand. Cobalt blazer sunglasses he keeps on until the room notices. Renee follows sleek ponytail white sneakers that won't touch grass. Their kids make for the dessert table, negotiating corner pieces like litigators. Graham drapes an arm around Dad and frames a selfie. "Look at you, Pops. 65 and handsome." Renee finds me in the kitchen pass-through. "Still on your sabbatical," she chirps. "Must be nice to unplug." Sabbatical lands like rash. "I've got retainer clients," I say, stacking plates. She nods like I should stop juggling knives. Mom sails and plants a kiss on Graham and stage whispers about the lake house he listed. "Full cash offer pending," she announces to anyone with ears. "Your brother always lands on his feet." She glides past me without seeing the frosting on my wrist, or the pill organizer I forgot to slide back into the drawer. Jazz from Dad's old stereo slides under the noise-warm horns that make the room seem kinder than it is. I cut cake, pass plates, refill ice. Graham floats, pressing flesh, dropping phrases like referral pipeline and pre-approval. Aunt Deb asks about Tyler, as if I'm reporting on a broken alternator. "We don't talk," I say. She says boys will be boys and moves on to potato salad. Graham clinks his glass at the dining table. He lifts his drink at heart level, a man fluent in reflected sincerity. "To Dad," he says. "To the man who taught us to stand on our own 2 feet even when one of them's giving you hell." Laughter breaks on cue. To 65 and to what's next for the Barnes family. What's next glitters for most people. In my ear, it lands heavy like a door quietly clicking shut. He keeps going casual as weather. He's been studying market shifts, school rankings, crime trends, floodplains. He knows a guy with access to pre-MLS inventory. Phrases stack like sandbags, smart money, safer streets, long-term play. Each one thuds. Mom's eyes glow the way they did when the church unveiled a new fellowship hall. She is already decorating a place that doesn't exist yet. Open sightlines, white cabinets you can wipe clean of life. I carry Dad a second slice and tuck a napkin under it. He catches my wrist. One squeeze. I breathe. The kids rocket through the hall. Renee apologizes without slowing them. Graham crouches for another photo, angles it so the oxygen tubing winks out of sight. "You look good," he says. And Dad does. The heat has gentled, and his laugh lines remember their job. At the sink, I meet my own eyes in the dark window, a woman who belongs here, and a woman who wasn't expected to stay. The porch lantern creaks on its chain. Outside, a screen door bangs. A dog answers like a neighbor who can't help getting involved. The air tastes like sugar and charcoal. If I stand very still, the house feels like a tired, generous animal that has carried us farther than we admit. Back in the living room, Lydia sells Graham's future like her best casserole. School, she tells Mrs. Elroy from 2 doors down, as if my parents are enrolling next week. Safety, she adds, and clucks at the street. And a proper homeowners association. You know standards. Her gaze snags on my laptop and the pill organizer I forgot to put away. Clutter, the look says. Renee smiles with the clean assurance of a brochure. Walter crooks a finger. "You okay?" he whispers. "Plenty of people here," I say. "I'm surplus labor." He huffs, then winces. "You're the engine," he says. They think the car moves because the hood is shiny. I won't cry. I cut his cake into neat bites with the side of a fork and guard his quiet like it's currency. Graham claps again from the mantel where our family photos climb in sequence preschool Little League prom weddings. He's centered in every frame. I'm often at the edge, half-turned, squinting into light. "One last thing before pie," he says, smile bright enough to read by. "I've been running numbers. Interest rates are stabilizing. Inventory's moving. There's a window short but big enough for families like ours to climb through." He doesn't look at Dad when he says families like ours. He looks at me. "It's time for big changes," Graham says, voice dipped in calm. "Schools, safety, smart money, and better space for Dad." Heads bob. Someone says, "Amen." Renee squeezes his elbow. Mom's smile holds like a pose. She checks my face to see if I'll be gracious, as if gracious equals silent. We sing happy birthday again because the kids want a do-over. Wax drips down the numbers like a joke about time. Dad tugs me close to help him blow. I wish for breath, for time, for the ground to stop shifting under us while we're still standing. Smoke writes cursive in the air, and people cheer because cake cancels dread for 90 seconds. Graham raises his glass once more. Arms steady, eyes locked on me, as if the rest of the room has been dismissed. His smile is easy. By next month, he says, letting better stretch like a verdict, we'll all be in a better house. He waits just long enough for the room to lean toward him. "Pack your bags." The next morning, sunlight spilled through the kitchen blinds in hard yellow bars. Mom was already dressed in her church luncheon best hair, sprayed pearls, fastened a smile so rehearsed, it made me tired. She'd laid out brunch like we were hosting dignitaries' fruit salad in the crystal bowl, eggs, steaming in a chafing dish, orange juice in the pitcher that only appeared on holidays. Graham sat at the head of the table, scrolling on his tablet, voice smooth as a local news anchor. "So," he said, glancing around, "I think it's time we talk next steps." I poured coffee and stayed standing. "Next steps for what?" I asked. "For the house," he said, grinning like he was pitching an idea on Shark Tank. "I've been looking at the market and there's no better time to sell. The neighborhood's hot investors are circling and I can get top dollar before rates climb again." Mom clasped her hands. "He's right. We've been here 32 years. It's time for something modern, somewhere near good schools for the kids." "The kids," I said slowly. Graham leaned back in his chair. "Mom and Dad will come live with us in Bendridge. We just closed on a 5-bedroom with a finished basement and an in-law suite. Great space-gated community HOA takes care of everything. Dad gets his privacy, Mom gets grandkids down the hall." Dad looked up from his oatmeal, bewildered. "And this house?" Graham's smile sharpened. "We sell it. The proceeds go toward upgrades and some medical equipment for you. Win-win." I could feel the blood drain from my face. "You're selling their house." "Our house," he corrected, still smiling. We'll all benefit. It's time to consolidate assets and make life easier for everyone. Everyone except me, I said. He sighed dramatically, the way he used to when I couldn't hit the softball straight. Viv, you've been talking about finding your own place forever. This is your chance for a clean break. You'll get your independence. Independence. The word snapped like a rubber band. I already have independence, I said. I pay bills here, run dad's appointments, keep this place standing. Mom cut in quickly. You've been a blessing, sweetheart, truly, but it's not healthy for you to stay stuck. You're almost 30, and it's time to think about your own life. My own life is here helping him. I pointed toward Dad, who stared at the table as if the pattern in the wood might open a door. Don't make this about guilt, Graham said, brushing crumbs from his sleeve. Dad's health is fine now. You've done your part, but you can't just squat here forever. Squat? My voice cracked. I live here because you two couldn't afford his prescriptions or the utility bills I took over to keep the lights on. Mom's jaw tightened. There's no need to get dramatic. You know your brother's just trying to help. By selling the house out from under me, Graham reached into his briefcase and pulled out a glossy folder, sliding it across the table. Inside was a printed net sheet from a brokerage. I already ran the numbers with Paisley Shaw, she's a top agent. If we move fast, we can list by Friday. 800 grand easy. Dad frowned. Friday? That's in 5 days. Perfect timing, Graham said. We'll stage next week, open house after. Renee's already looking at decorators. The air turned thick. The fork in my hand trembled. You talked to a realtor about listing this house without even asking me. He laughed. You don't need to be consulted, Viv. You're not an owner. You're family. We make decisions together for the greater good. Mom nodded approvingly. Your brother's very practical. It's time we let him lead. I looked at Dad silently, begging him to speak, to say anything that sounded like resistance. His mouth opened, then closed again. Shame flashed across his face. He stirred his oatmeal as if the decision had already been swallowed. Come on, Graham said lightly. It's not like we're throwing you out. You've got time to find something small, maybe downtown near your design clients. You're creative. You'll land on your feet. My throat burned. You're giving me less than a week to find a place. He shrugged. Plenty of rentals if you're not picky, Mom added. Most of what's in your room is just old stuff anyway. I'll help you sort it out. It was like standing in a room where the floor quietly disappeared. Every sound was muffled except my heartbeat. You're unbelievable, I whispered. I've spent 2 years cleaning this house, paying your overdue bills, keeping Dad out of the hospital, and you're planning to celebrate by evicting me. Graham rose from his chair, smile never fading. We're planning to celebrate moving forward. You're welcome, by the way. I grabbed my keys from the counter and headed for the back door. Mom called after me. Don't be childish, Vivian. You always make everything personal. Outside, the sunlight felt too sharp. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone. I scrolled to the contact I hadn't used since the divorce. Miriam Cole, real estate attorney. She'd helped me untangle the house Tyler and I bought before he vanished with the contractor's deposit accounts. When she answered, her voice was brisk and steady. Vivian Barnes. Been a while. I need a title check, I said, keeping my voice low. On 4 and 18 Maple Street. You buying? She asked. Maybe reclaiming, I said. And send a cease and desist to any realtor who tries to list it. She paused. Should I ask why? Because they don't own it? I said. Not really. I leaned against the side of the house, staring at the worn porch steps I'd repainted twice this summer. The truth sat cold in my chest. 11 months ago, when the bank sent default notices for missed mortgage payments and unpaid taxes, I'd found the letters in the mail pile hidden under catalogs. They were 3 months from foreclosure, and Dad was still recovering from surgery. They couldn't afford the arrears. So I created an LLC, Riverpoint Holdings, and bought the house at auction with what was left of my divorce settlement. Then I quietly paid off the back taxes and let them keep living here, never telling them they'd already lost it once. I thought I was protecting them, saving the home's dignity, maybe saving theirs. I never thought I'd have to defend it from my own brother. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. The text read, "Listing draft, ready for review, MLS upload tonight. P.S. Paisley Shaw." My stomach flipped. They were moving forward, pretending ownership they didn't have. I could almost hear Graham's voice, smug and unbothered. "Paperwork always catches up, Viv." I walked to the curb where Dad's old mailbox leaned like a man too tired to argue. Across the street, Mrs. Elroy was watering her petunias. She waved, then frowned when she saw my face. "Everything all right, honey?" "Not yet," I said. "But it will be." The wind lifted the edges of the for sale flyer still taped to the post from some other house down the block, a ghost of another family's goodbye. I tore it off and crushed it in my fist. Inside, laughter floated from the kitchen, Graham's salesman laugh, Mom's polite echo plates clinking. I watched them through the window, my reflection overlapping theirs, invisible and transparent all at once. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I felt dangerous. "Time's up, Graham," I whispered. "You picked the wrong house to sell." The clerk at the county recorder's office didn't look up when I slid the folder across the counter. "Property filings," I said, and tried to sound like someone who did this every day. My pulse thudded anyway. The fluorescent lights made the paper glow like confession. I'd spent the night printing everything Miriam sent: River Point's articles of organization, the trustee's deed from the foreclosure auction, the payment receipts, and a cease and desist letter addressed to Paisley Shaw Realty. I'd slept 2 hours, then driven downtown in the same jeans I wore yesterday. "You're filing a memorandum of beneficial interest," the clerk said, stamping each page. "This'll make it public that River Point owns 418 Maple Street. Anyone doing a title search will have to see it." The stamp hit the page with a sound that felt like armor being forged. "Done," he said. "Recorded as of 9:12 a.m. By 10, I was back on Maple Street, the morning thick with lawnmower hums and the sweet rot of mulched grass. I taped laminated notices on the front and side doors: "No trespass. No access for agents or contractors. Authorization required by owner." The words looked sterile and severe against our white siding, but for the first time in days I felt grounded. The house was mine, at least on paper. Inside, Dad sat at the kitchen table in his robe, spooning oatmeal. "What are you doing, honey?" he asked, squinting at the paper rolls still tucked under my arm. I set one in front of him. "Proof," I said, "that this place isn't going anywhere." He adjusted his glasses and read slowly. When he saw my name, his hand trembled. "You saved us." His voice cracked on the last word. "You bought the house. I didn't want to embarrass anyone," I said quietly. "You were behind on payments after the surgery. It was easier to create a company and handle it privately. I thought I could fix things without all this." He looked toward the window as if the siding itself could confirm it. "Your mother doesn't know." "She will," I said. "Soon." He pressed a hand to his chest, trying to steady his breath. "You shouldn't have had to do that." "I know." The back door slammed and Lydia's heels clicked across the tile. She froze when she saw the papers. "What is this?" Dad tried to speak, but I answered first. "Proof that this house belongs to River Point Holdings, me. It's been that way since last year." Her face flushed pink. "You're lying." Graham said. "Graham doesn't own it," I said. "Neither do you. The bank sold it. I bought it back. You're living in a house I paid for." For a heartbeat, silence filled the room like heat. Then she stepped forward, pointing a manicured finger at me. "This is some stunt to make your brother look bad. He's trying to help Vivian. You always have to make yourself the victim." I laughed without humor. "You're defending the man trying to sell a home that's not his. He forged a listing agreement with a realtor who ignored a legal notice." "That's not help." "Lower your voice," she hissed, glancing toward the hallway where Dad sat gripping the table edge. "You'll upset him again." "Maybe he should be upset," I snapped. "Maybe we all should." The back door rattled again, and Mrs. Elroy appeared on the porch holding a basket of tomatoes. "You two all right?" she asked, peering through the screen. Lydia plastered on a smile. "Just a misunderstanding." Mrs. Elroy set the basket down, ignoring her tone. "You know your brother's been sniffing around the neighborhood, right?" she said to me. "Said he's working with Baudry Capital. They're trying to buy up the whole block, turn it into a cul-de-sac of new builds. They already got the daycare lot and 3 bungalows down by the stop sign." I froze. He didn't mention that. "He wouldn't," she said. "Told me not to tell you, actually. Said you'd get emotional." When she left, I leaned against the counter, shaking. It wasn't about helping family, it was a redevelopment grab. A tear-down plan. The phone buzzed. Miriam's voice crackled through the speaker. "We've got a problem," she said. Paisley Shaw ignored the cease and desist. "She claims your brother holds power of attorney for your father and can authorize the sale. She sent me a scanned copy." "Fake," I said instantly. "Probably," Miriam replied. "The notary looks sketchy. But they can get a listing up before we disprove it." I stared out the window where a lawn sign would probably appear within days, my name buried under someone else's idea of progress. "Then we go on offense," I said. I printed 20 copies of a notice of fraudulent listing and spent the afternoon hand-delivering them to every brokerage office within 10 miles. At each one, I asked to see the managing broker, laid the document on the counter, and repeated the same line. "Any listing for 418 Maple Street is unauthorized. You're now on notice. Proceed and you'll be liable." Some looked skeptical, some impressed, most wary. I didn't care which. By dusk, I was back on our porch, stapling flyers for a neighborhood meeting that night. Porch meeting, 8 p.m. Property and redevelopment updates. Bring neighbors. The letters were black and bold, steady as heartbeat lines. At 8 sharp folding chairs appeared like summoned soldiers. Retirees, single parents, the daycare owner, 3 veterans who'd bought their houses with GI loans, all of them wary, curious, angry. I stood under the porch light, clutching a file folder like a podium. "My brother wants to sell this house," I began. "He doesn't own it. And what's worse, he's been trying to buy out this entire block with a developer who plans to bulldoze it for luxury homes." A murmur rolled through the crowd. "That's what they did on Hillcrest," someone said. "Tripled property taxes." "They can't do that here," another neighbor muttered. "They can if no one stops them," I said. "But we have proof and we have rights. We just need to stand together." A hand went up. It was Mrs. Elroy. "What do you need us to do?" "Show up," I said. "Be loud. Sign statements about what you've been told, any pressure you've faced to sell. Developers hate attention." As people began nodding and whispering, a siren cut the air, shrill, too close. I turned toward the sound. The ambulance lights strobed against the siding, red and white. My stomach dropped. Dad was at the hallway's end, gripping the wall, face pale as chalk. "Chest hurts," he whispered. Lydia screamed his name. I was already dialing 911, shouting our address. The paramedics arrived fast, moving through the house with calm precision. I followed them, answering questions in a voice that didn't sound like mine. When they loaded him into the ambulance, Lydia climbed in after him, eyes glassy. The neighbor crowd lingered on the lawn, murmuring prayers, shifting awkwardly. I stood barefoot on the concrete, hands sticky with sweat and fear. The back doors closed. The siren started again, fading down Maple Street, until it was just a hum under the night. I looked up at the porch light, still glowing steady above the flyers. My reflection stared back in the front window, hair, wild eyes, hollow but unflinching. Enough pretending. Enough quiet. I was done keeping the peace. Hospitals always smell like surrender. By the time I reached Dad's room, the IV line glowed in the half-dark, and the monitor beeped a nervous rhythm that felt too close to my own pulse. Lydia sat beside him, flipping through a magazine she wasn't reading. "He's stable," she said without looking up. "The doctor said it was just stress." Her tone made it sound like stress was a choice, a bad habit he'd picked up. Graham arrived 20 minutes later, holding 2 cups of coffee and wearing a suit jacket he hadn't earned with worry. "You should go home, Viv," he said. "We've got it covered." I crossed my arms. "You've got what covered exactly?" "The transition," he said, lowering his voice like he was being generous. "Dad can rest while we handle logistics. I've already started coordinating with Paisley and Baudry. Everything's on schedule." Something in me snapped. On schedule? He just had a cardiac episode and you're worried about closing dates. He sighed as if I were a child who couldn't understand adult math. That's exactly why we need to move fast. The sale gives us resources for his care. You can't expect me to pause business because you're emotional. You mean because you're profiting? Lydia straightened in her chair. Stop. Both of you. This isn't the time. But it was exactly the time. The hospital's hum, the smell of antiseptic, the weight of silence. They all told the truth. Dad's body was breaking from the same strain I'd been carrying. You want resources, I said. Let's talk about where the last ones went. I walked down the hall to admissions and asked for billing records. The clerk hesitated until I showed my ID and said I was listed on the HIPAA form. When she printed the file, I saw the numbers that made my skin go cold. 2 Home Equity Credit Line draws $182,000 total, both signed 18 months ago. Borrower, Lydia Barnes. Co-signer, Graham Barnes, Family Financial Advisor. Funds wired to Barnes Equity Group, LLC. My breath shortened. Barnes Equity Group. He'd siphoned money out of the house before the foreclosure, probably to fund one of his developments. I thanked the clerk and walked back to the room, heart hammering. Lydia looked up when I entered. What's wrong with you? I dropped the file onto her lap. This. Her eyes skimmed the first page, then darted to Graham. You said that loan was temporary. He waved a hand. It was. We used it for some investments. The returns would have covered the payments if the market hadn't dipped. It's standard. Standard, I said. You drained their equity, lost the money, and never told them. Then you let them think the bank was the villain. Do you even hear yourself? Dad stirred weakly, opening his eyes. What's happening? Lydia clutched his hand. Nothing you need to worry about. But he was already scanning our faces. Graham. It was a business misstep, Graham said. I was trying to help. I couldn't stand another syllable of that word. I turned to Dad. They took out loans against the house. They lost it. That's why it went into foreclosure. I bought it back because they wouldn't tell you the truth. His expression collapsed into disbelief, then something harder, humiliation. He tried to sit up the monitor, shrieking protest. You knew, he whispered to Lydia. She looked away. I thought we could fix it. He closed his eyes. You fixed it by lying. The silence between us was a bridge, snapping strand by strand. When he drifted back into uneasy sleep, Lydia turned to me, tears streaking her foundation. You've ruined this family, she said. No, I said softly. You and Graham did that when you decided the truth was optional. That night I stood at the back of the neighborhood association meeting, hands still shaking. The gym smelled like floor wax and old coffee. Keisha Mora, a reporter from the local paper, had shown up after seeing my flyers. When my name was called, I stepped to the projector and loaded the flash drive Miriam had prepared. The screen filled with documents, chain of title trustees' deed loan history, Beaudry's development maps. The microphone squealed once before my voice came out steady. You all deserve to know what's happening to this block, I said. Beaudry Capital plans to buy up 8 properties, level them, and build luxury homes. My brother's company is part of the acquisition. A low murmur swelled into outrage. One neighbor shouted, They tried to buy my place last month. Another said, They told me taxes were going to double. Heads turned toward Graham, who had just walked in with Lydia, both looking polished and certain. This is misinformation, he said smoothly. I'm a licensed broker, not a villain. My sister's been under a lot of stress. She's twisting things. He clicked his own laptop to project emails, doctored versions of our conversations, spliced screenshots implying I'd agreed to the sale. The room's energy wavered. Lydia dabbed her eyes, muttering, She needs help. For a moment I felt the ground tilt again, the way it always did when their voices drowned mine. Then my phone buzzed. Miriam's name lit the screen. I stepped aside and answered in a whisper. Tell me something good. Not exactly, she said. Title insurers challenging your foreclosure purchase. They're claiming the sale might be voidable because the notice of default was defective. What does that mean? It means the bank may argue you didn't have proper notice to buy. If they win, your ownership could be undone. I pressed my palm to my forehead. Tell me there's a way to fix it. There is if we can prove the notices were properly served. I need every document, every delivery receipt, every scrap of evidence from the foreclosure file. I hung up and turned back to the crowd where Graham was still performing his damage control. Give me 48 hours, I said into the microphone. My voice cut through the chatter. 48 hours and I'll bring you proof of everything who owns what, who's been lying, and who's trying to steal this neighborhood. Keisha lifted her camera, the flash a brief explosion of light. Graham's smirk faltered for half a second, and in that flicker I saw fear, the kind that comes when someone realizes the story's about to flip. When the meeting ended, people gathered around me instead of him. We'll back you, said the daycare owner. Just tell us what you need. I nodded, promising answers I didn't yet have. As the crowd dispersed, I caught Graham by the door. 48 hours, I said. He smiled thinly. Make sure you use them wisely. You've always been good at wasting time. Outside rain began to fall, thin, needling, insistent. It hit the asphalt like Morse code. I walked to my car and sat in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Behind the noise of the rain, I could hear my father's voice from years ago, steady and sure. Do the job right, Viv. Even when no one's watching. 48 hours. I could work with that. The next morning I was at the county treasurer's office before the doors unlocked. The air smelled like paper dust and burnt coffee. A clerk named Arnold Vega, a quiet man with ink stains on his fingers, recognized my name from the foreclosure file. You again, he said. Guess you're not done fighting. I smiled tightly. Not even close. He led me into the record vault, a cool concrete room stacked with banker boxes and steel drawers. We dug through foreclosure folders from the previous year until we found mine, Maple Street Barnes docket, 22 to 4/17. Arnold flipped through the stapled notices, pulling out the certified mail receipts. You're looking for the green cards, he said. When he found one with a signature in blue ink, he held it up to the fluorescent light. Signed by Lydia Barnes. My pulse leapt. Dated 2 months before the sale, he added. That's service of notice right there. I took a photo, then another. Make me certified copies, I said. He grinned. Knew there was a reason I liked this job. By noon I was at a copy shop near downtown, enlarging the signatures until the blue loops filled the page. Then I overlaid them with the signature on Graham's power of attorney document, the one Miriam said looked forged. The differences screamed from the page. Lydia's real signature dipped on the Y. The forged one cut straight through. Pressure points didn't match. Even the pen flow was wrong. I photographed everything, labeling each layer. At a diner down the street, I met the process server who'd handled the foreclosure. A broad-shouldered man named Ron signed an affidavit confirming personal service had been made to Lydia and adult son on premises Graham on the listed dates. Another piece of the puzzle locked into place. That afternoon, I walked the neighborhood. The daycare owner, Mrs. Fields, told me Graham had pressured her to sell by warning about upcoming zoning changes. 2 retired veterans said they'd gotten flyers from Beaudry promising early equity cash-outs. Every story matched the same pattern: fear first, then lowball offers. I asked each of them to sign declarations, explaining that I was filing a motion to stop the sale. They didn't hesitate. By sunset, 10 signatures filled my folder. We gathered on my porch that evening under the light Dad once rewired himself. The veterans brought folding chairs. The daycare owner arrived with cookies. Mrs. Elroy made coffee strong enough to fight wars. We're calling it the Porchlight Coalition, she said, tapping the poster we'd made from an old campaign sign. Home's not hype. I couldn't help laughing. It's perfect, she pointed at me. You started this, honey. You finish it. While the others talked strategy, yard signs, petitions, a social media page, I stepped inside to call Miriam. She answered on the first ring. Tell me you found something, she said. I found everything I told her and described the receipts, the affidavit, the forged signature. She whistled. That's airtight. I'm filing for a temporary restraining order tonight to freeze any listing activity, plus a declaratory judgment to quiet title to Riverpoint Holdings. I'll attach every shred of evidence. The hearing's Friday morning at 9 sharp before Judge Patrice Dahl. She's tough but fair. What do you need from me? I asked. Just show up, Miriam said. And keep your composure. Let the evidence do the talking. I hung up and looked around the living room. The walls were crowded with old photos, birthdays, graduations, the night I won the art fair ribbon. For the first time, the memories didn't feel like anchors. They felt like proof of what I was fighting for. The next day, I stopped by the hospital to see Dad. He was propped up in bed, color back in his cheeks, reading the sports section. You look like you've been running a marathon, he said. Feels like one, I replied, pulling up a chair. We're going to court Friday. I have everything we need. He nodded slowly. I wish I'd asked more questions before trusting your brother. You believed him because you wanted to, I said. He sounded confident. He always did. Dad chuckled faintly. Confidence and truth aren't the same thing. I forgot that. His hand trembled as he reached for the water glass. You're doing good, Viv. Don't let them tell you otherwise. When I left the hospital, the October air was bright and cold. Back at home, Lydia was waiting on the porch, sunglasses hiding her eyes. Your lawyer sent papers to the house, she said flatly. You filed something against us. I filed something to protect all of us, I answered. You think dragging your family into court is protection? You dragged us here the second you lied. She exhaled sharply. You don't understand what it's like to watch everything you built slip away. Graham said he could fix it. I believed him. And now, she looked toward the garden where the porch light sign leaned in the dirt. Now I don't know what to believe. Then believe the evidence, I said. Because feelings got us into this mess. For a moment she looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, tired, cornered, older. You'll destroy him, she said quietly. He already did that himself, I replied. That night the neighborhood came alive with movement. We staked the porchlight signs along the sidewalks, each one a small rebellion against the machine Graham had built. Cars slowed as drivers read them. Someone honked in support. The daycare owner filmed a video for the coalition's page explaining how families like ours were being pushed out. Keisha. The reporter messaged me. Heard about your filing. Mind if I attend the hearing? I texted back. Please do. The next morning I drove to the courthouse to drop off the final exhibits. The building loomed white and sharp against the sky. Miriam met me on the steps with a stack of folders. Judge Dahl confirmed the TRO hearing for Friday, she said. Be ready for a crowd. Baudry's sending their counsel and rumor has it your brother's showing up in person. I took the folder from her, steadying my grip. Good. Let him look me in the eye, she smiled. That's the spirit. As we walked down the marble hallway, I thought of all the nights I'd stayed silent while Graham talked over me, while Mom brushed my words aside, while this house quietly slipped out of our hands. Silence had been my comfort. Now it was their turn to listen. When I stepped outside, the autumn wind cut through my jacket, crisp and exact. Across the street, a black SUV pulled to the curb. Graham stepped out, immaculate as ever. Dark suit, polished shoes, sunglasses, even though the sun was half hidden. Behind him came two men in navy suits carrying briefcases stamped with Baudry's logo. He smiled when he saw me, the expression smooth as polished stone. See you Friday, Viv? He called, slipping his sunglasses up onto his head. Wear something professional. I didn't answer. I just stared at him until he turned away. The wind caught the edge of the porchlight flyer in my hand, snapping it against my palm like a promise. Friday wasn't just a hearing. It was the reckoning I'd been building toward my whole life. The courthouse lobby smelled like polished wood and nerves. By 8:45, the benches outside courtroom 3B were packed. Neighbors from Maple Street had come in their Sunday best. Keisha sat near the aisle, camera bag at her feet, notebook already open. Miriam adjusted her blazer beside me, flipping through the evidence packet one last time. "You're calm," she said, half surprised. "I'm not calm," I replied. "I'm focused." My hands trembled anyway. The bailiff opened the doors, and a current of voices swept into the room. Inside, sunlight streamed through high windows, catching on the seal of the state mounted above the bench. Judge Patrice Dahl took her seat, a woman in her 50s with silver hair and the kind of gaze that makes you check your conscience. On the opposite table sat Graham, smooth and unbothered, flanked by Baudry's corporate attorney, a man in a charcoal suit with a face like wet granite. Lydia sat behind them, hands folded, her wedding ring glinting each time she twisted it. "All rise," the bailiff said, and for a second the scrape of chairs sounded like thunder. Miriam opened with precision. She laid out the timeline: the foreclosure, the auction, the transfer to Riverpoint Holdings, and the recorded deed. "My client, Ms. Vivian Barnes, lawfully purchased the property in question using personal funds," she said. "She cured the outstanding mortgage, paid back taxes, and has maintained the home since. The opposing party, her brother, Mr. Graham Barnes, attempted to sell this property without ownership or authorization, based on a forged power of attorney." Graham rose, buttoning his jacket, like a man about to charm his way out of a parking ticket. "Your Honor, this is a family misunderstanding. I acted under the belief that my father had given me authority to manage his affairs. My sister, though well-intentioned, has misconstrued paperwork and turned a family matter into a lawsuit." His voice was silk on concrete. He gestured toward Lydia. "Our mother can confirm the intent was never malicious. We simply wanted stability." Judge Dahl looked over her glasses. "Then, let's determine whose stability is at stake." Miriam called the first witness, the title clerk from the county recorder's office. He confirmed the deed, the recording date, the validity of the transfer. Next came Arnold Vega with the certified mail receipts, Lydia's signature glowing in blue ink under the document camera. The judge studied it, brow furrowing. When Miriam called the handwriting expert, the courtroom stilled. On a monitor, side-by-side comparisons of the signatures filled the screen. "The power of attorney signature exhibits tremor patterns inconsistent with natural handwriting," the analyst explained. "It appears to be traced or digitally copied." Miriam zoomed in on the irregular ink dots. "In your professional opinion, was this signature forged?" "Yes," the analyst said, "without question." Graham's attorney objected, claiming bias, but Judge Dahl waved him off. "Noted. Continue." Next, Miriam introduced the process server's affidavit, proof Graham had been personally served foreclosure papers months before the sale. "So you were aware the property was in foreclosure?" she asked. Graham shifted. "I may have received documents, yes, but—" "Thank you," she cut in. "No further questions." When it was his turn, Graham's lawyer went on offense. "Ms. Barnes," he said, circling me like I was on trial, "you formed Riverpoint Holdings using a settlement from your divorce, correct?" "Yes." "So this entire enterprise was conducted in secret from your parents. I wanted to protect their pride." "Or to control them," he pressed. "To humiliate your brother by cutting him out." I met his stare. "If I wanted humiliation, I'd have let the bank throw them out. I bought the house so they could stay in it." He smirked and turned to the judge. "Her own testimony confirms deceit. She concealed ownership for over a year. That's not altruism. That's manipulation." "Objection," Miriam said sharply. "Argumentative. Sustained," Judge Dahl said. Then came Walter. My father walked slowly to the witness stand, leaning on his cane, but his voice carried when he spoke. "I was raised to believe men provide for their families," he said. "After my heart attack, that wasn't true anymore. Vivian took care of me, changed my dressings, handled bills, fixed what broke. She didn't take from us. She saved us." His eyes met mine. "If she hadn't stepped in, we'd be homeless." Even Lydia, stiff in the gallery, blinked hard. Graham kept his gaze on the table. When closing arguments came, Miriam was surgical. "This case isn't about family squabbles," she said. "It's about ownership, consent, and integrity. My client has followed the law. Her brother has not. The evidence proves the power of attorney is falsified, the attempted listing unauthorized, and the threats to sell baseless. Graham's lawyer responded with bluster about family misunderstandings about sisters overreacting and corporate formalities. When he finished, the courtroom was silent except for the ticking of the clock. Judge Dahl leaned back, hands steepled. "I've heard enough." She turned her gaze first to Graham, then to me. "This is what happens when families mix loyalty with property law. But facts are facts." She lifted the stamped deed. "Ownership of 418 Maple Street rests with Riverpoint Holdings LLC, wholly owned by Ms. Vivian Barnes. Any sale or listing conducted without her consent is unlawful." She paused, eyes narrowing at Graham. "The forged power of attorney is hereby set aside. Any transactions based on it are void. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the county attorney for investigation into potential forgery and mortgage fraud." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Keisha's pen flew across her notebook. Miriam exhaled softly beside me, a sound like release. Judge Dahl wasn't finished. "The temporary restraining order remains in place. No party other than the rightful owner may encumber or market the property until further notice." Court is adjourned. The gavel fell once clean and final. For a moment, no one moved. Then the sound of neighbors whispering filled the air, words like "finally" and "about time." Lydia covered her face with trembling hands. Renee pulled at Graham's sleeve, but he didn't stand. His jaw tightened, color draining from his face. Outside, microphones and cameras waited on the courthouse steps. Keisha aimed hers at me. "Vivian, are you evicting your parents?" someone shouted. "Is this revenge?" I looked straight at the lens. "No," I said. "This isn't revenge. This is a reminder that the truth still counts." Miriam nudged me toward the car, but I turned back once. Across the street, Graham stood under the awning, hands shoved into his pockets, staring at the pavement, as though he could still find an angle to win. For years, I'd been the quiet one, the helper, the backup plan. Now he was the one left without a script. The autumn wind carried the courthouse flag to a full snap. I lifted my chin, feeling its pull on my hair. The story wasn't over. There would be fallout apologies, headlines, but the verdict had changed everything. For the first time in a long while, the house on Maple Street was safe. And so was I. The morning after the ruling, the house felt different. The walls seemed to breathe again. Sunlight spilled through the kitchen window, turning the old linoleum into something almost new. Dad sat at the table with his coffee, reading the front-page article from the local paper. Judge halts Maple Street sale fraud allegations under review. My name was in the second paragraph. He looked up and grinned. "You made the paper, kiddo." I laughed, but my chest felt tight. Not sure that's always a good thing. He folded the paper carefully. "Sometimes it is." By mid-afternoon, Miriam and I met in her office to sign the final paperwork. The temporary restraining order had bought me time, but I wanted something permanent. Together, we drafted a life estate agreement for my parents. "This guarantees they can live in the house for the rest of their lives," Miriam explained, sliding the pages toward me. "But you retain full ownership through Riverpoint Holdings. It prevents future liens, loans, or transfers. Everything runs through you." I initialed each page, each signature a seal, on what I'd already promised myself: I wouldn't lose this home again. Not to the bank, not to family, not to pride. When we returned home, Lydia stood in the doorway, the smell of lemon polish thick in the air. Her eyes were rimmed red but steady. "I talked to Miriam," she said. "She told me what this agreement means." I nodded. "You and Dad can stay here for life. You won't owe rent, but taxes and insurance are covered through the trust. No one can touch it." She exhaled slowly, a sound between relief and regret. "You didn't have to do that after everything we said." I looked at her, not angry anymore, just tired. "I did it because this is still our family home. I just needed it to be safe." That night, we held a block meeting in the yard. The Porchlight Coalition had grown from a handful of neighbors to dozens. We spread folding tables under the oaks, served chili from slow cookers, and stapled new flyers that read, "Stop predatory development, protect Maple Street." The daycare owner thanked me, then announced she'd secured pro bono legal help to challenge Beaudry's zoning petition. Two city council members promised to attend the next hearing. For the first time, our street didn't feel like a collection of separate houses, it felt like a single voice. When Mrs. Elroy toasted with her styrofoam cup saying, "To Vivian, who reminded us we still own something worth fighting for," I nearly cried into my chili. Over the next few weeks, we built momentum. The Porchlight Coalition launched a website, organized volunteer days to fix fences and paint porches for older residents, and started a petition for an anti-predatory lending ordinance. Keisha published a follow-up story titled, "One Street's Stand Against Corporate Greed," complete with a photo of Dad smiling under the porchlight cane in one hand, coffee mug in the other. He taped the article inside the kitchen cabinet next to the mugs. "In case I forget what my daughter pulled off," he said. Then came the hard part: repairing the family. Lydia agreed to attend counseling, though she warned she wouldn't spill emotions on command. The first session was awkward. She sat rigid on the therapist's couch while I traced patterns on the armrest. "I wanted to be the mother who saved us," she said finally. "When Graham said he could fix it, I believed him. I couldn't face another failure." Her voice cracked. "I let him use me because it was easier than admitting we were drowning." I swallowed hard. "I wanted to be the daughter who didn't make you feel small, so I made myself invisible." The room went quiet, the kind of silence that doesn't punish but holds. When the hour ended, Lydia reached for my hand. She didn't say sorry, but she didn't have to. Graham's fall was swift and public. His brokerage suspended him pending the fraud inquiry, and Beaudry cut ties within a week. The county attorney's office opened an investigation into the forged power of attorney. When reporters called, he gave no statement. Renee packed up the kids and moved to her sister's place in Topeka. One night, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "I never meant to hurt Dad. I just thought I could fix everything faster." I stared at the words until they blurred, then typed back, "You hurt him anyway. Start there." By November, the porchlight had become a symbol. The coalition's meetings drew people from other neighborhoods, renters, retirees, even a few local students. We formalized the group as a nonprofit called the Porchlight Trust, focused on helping homeowners file homestead exemptions, repair code violations, and fight deed theft. I designed the logo at the dining table where I'd once eaten in silence, a single porch light glowing above an open door. Every time I printed it, I thought of Dad's words, how light wasn't decoration, it was protection. Late one evening, Miriam dropped by with new documents for me to sign. "This one establishes a limited power of attorney for property management," she said. "You'll need it in case your parents can't make decisions later." Judge Dahl already reviewed it. I flipped through the pages. "Feels strange having power of attorney after what Graham did." She smiled. "That's the difference, you're using it to guard, not to grab." When she left, I filed everything neatly into a folder labeled Home. Outside, the wind carried the first bite of winter. The porch light burned steady over the yard sign that still read "Homes Not Hype." Across the street, Dad's garden was mostly bare except for a few stubborn marigolds clinging to color. Lydia brought out a blanket and joined me on the steps. "I thought peace would feel quiet," she said. "Turns out it's just honest." I nodded. Quiet never fixed anything. My phone buzzed again, a new text this time from Keisha County Attorney, filed charges. Forgery and mortgage fraud, 1 count each. Official tomorrow. I showed the screen to Lydia. She inhaled sharply, then whispered, "I didn't think it would go that far." "It had to," I said. "Otherwise, it happens again." When the mail came the next morning, a certified envelope waited on the porch rail stamped County Attorney's Office. My hands shook as I broke the seal. Inside was a notice of restitution state versus Graham Barnes, ordered repayment to Riverpoint Holdings and the Porchlight Trust. Lydia stood beside me watching. Her voice was soft. "What are you going to do?" I folded the letter carefully. "Hold him accountable," I said. "And keep the light on." The street was quiet except for the rustle of leaves against pavement. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was standing on borrowed ground. I'd drawn a line around the house, around my parents, around myself, and no one was crossing it again. By the time spring settled over Wichita, the house on Maple Street had found its heartbeat again. The air smelled of cut grass and sawdust from the repairs Dad insisted on doing himself. His health had improved more in 4 months than it had in 2 years. Every morning he'd drag a folding chair into the yard, coffee mug in hand, to watch the sun creep over the rooftops. "Gonna be a good day," he'd say, and most of them were. Lydia had taken to baking again, filling the kitchen with cinnamon and the clatter of mixing bowls. Sometimes I'd wake to the smell of banana bread and realize it was the first time in years the house smelled like peace instead of panic. The county's investigation moved quickly. The letter from the attorney's office that had arrived in November turned into a full case by December. Graham was charged with 1 count of forgery and 1 count of mortgage fraud, both reduced when he agreed to cooperate and pay restitution. The hearing drew another crowd of neighbors, though this time I didn't attend to fight. I went to listen. Graham's suit hung looser on him, his face pale, the old self-assurance replaced by something closer to humility. When the judge asked for comment, he didn't make excuses. "I thought success meant steering everyone else," he said, "but I ended up driving them off the road." The judge accepted the plea deal: probation, license suspension, repayment to Riverpoint, and to the Porchlight Trust. It wasn't revenge, it was accountability, and that felt heavier and better than victory. He paid his first restitution check in January, along with a handwritten note for repairs and regrets. I deposited the check and pinned the note to the bulletin board beside the Porchlight logo. Lydia couldn't bring herself to read it at first, but one evening she did. "He always had your father's handwriting," she murmured. "Clean, proud, careful. Maybe he'll learn to use it for something honest." Life didn't become perfect, but it became possible. The Porchlight Trust grew faster than I expected. We filed as a nonprofit, recruited volunteers, and began helping seniors apply for homestead exemptions and fix old code violations before developers could exploit them. The first time I saw our logo on a city banner, an amber light above an open door, I almost cried at the stoplight. Keisha's latest article, "One Quiet Daughter." One loud block ran in the regional paper and brought more attention than I knew what to do with. Donations started trickling in. Tyler, my ex, even sent a message through the website: "I heard what you're building. I'd like to help with repairs if you'll have me." I thanked him, but said no. Some things didn't need rebuilding. Dad called it poetic that Graham's restitution payments went directly into the trust's account. His bad choices funding better ones, he said with a grin. That's recycling. When the third payment arrived, we used it to install a ramp at the daycare center for kids with mobility issues. Mrs. Fields cried when she saw it finished. This street used to be scared of losing everything, she said. Now it's building things again. In February, Lydia surprised me by asking if Graham could visit. I hesitated, then nodded. He came alone without fanfare, carrying a paper bag of groceries instead of the usual brand-name gifts. When he stepped into the living room, he looked around like he was visiting a museum of a life he'd almost destroyed. "It looks the same," he said quietly. "That's the point," I replied. He handed me the bag. "Mom mentioned you were low on flour." It was such an ordinary thing to say that it knocked the air out of me. We sat on the porch later, the same swing where this whole story had started. The air was cool, the stars steady. "I was wrong," he said simply. "About everything. About you. About what mattered." I studied his face for signs of performance, but there were none. "I can't undo it," he added, "but I want to try to be part of this family again if you'll have me." I thought of all the nights I'd replayed his cruelty, his arrogance, the way he'd smiled when he told me to pack my bags. Anger was easy, but peace took more muscle. "There are rules," I said. "You apologize to Mom and Dad for real. You stop talking about people like they're pieces on a board. And you never ever use someone else's name to get what you want." "Done," he said. "All of it." I believed him, or maybe I just wanted to. Either way, it was enough. He came back a week later with Renee and the kids. The children raced through the garden shouting about the marigolds. Lydia served lemonade while Renee thanked her for keeping this house alive. The tension eased a little each minute, like thawing ground. When they left, Dad leaned against the doorframe, eyes shining. "You fixed us," he said. I smiled. We fixed ourselves. By April, the garden was thick with color. The marigolds had multiplied, spilling over the path like gold coins. We added tomatoes, beans, and a new bird feeder that Dad insisted on painting red. He worked slowly but steadily, the limp barely noticeable now. "Can't let the house outwork me," he joked. One evening, while we sat on the porch steps, the sun dipping behind the oaks, Dad said, "You know what the funny thing is? Graham used to call you the failure. But you're the one who saved us. Saved the house, the family, the whole damn block." I laughed softly. "I didn't save anyone. I just stopped letting them drown." He shook his head. "Success isn't about money or a fancy job. It's about showing up when it counts. About doing the right thing even when nobody's clapping." He took a slow sip of tea. "By that measure, you're the richest person I know." The street hummed with evening life, kids on bikes, sprinklers ticking, someone grilling 2 houses down. Porch lights flicked on one by one like a quiet salute. Ours burned brightest. Lydia came out carrying a plate of cookies, her hair tied back, her smile easy for once. She sat beside us and handed me one. "For the record," she said, "I like your version of success better." We sat there as dusk deepened, the three of us framed in the glow of the porch light. Down the sidewalk, a familiar car slowed. Graham stepped out holding a small wooden birdhouse he'd built himself. "For Dad's garden," he said. "I figured it was time I made something, not just sold it." Dad chuckled and took it from him. "Looks sturdy." "You used my old plans?" Graham nodded. "Vivian sent them to me." For a long moment, no one spoke. The quiet was full, but not heavy, the kind that means the worst has already passed. I watched as Dad hung the birdhouse on the trellis, Lydia brushed sawdust off her skirt, and Graham's kids chased fireflies near the fence. The porch light glowed steady above us, a sentinel more than a symbol. When the first stars appeared, I stood and switched the light on before the sun was fully gone. The bulb hummed softly, casting the yard in warm gold. It wasn't just a habit anymore, it was a declaration. "The light's been on the whole time," I said, watching Graham's kids race up the steps. "It just stops strangers from rearranging the furniture." Dad laughed, deep and proud. Lydia squeezed my hand, and for the first time in years, I let myself believe that home wasn't something you inherited, it was something you kept alive. And with that final porch light glowing through the Kansas dusk, Vivian's story comes full circle, a reminder that sometimes justice isn't loud, it's steady. If this story moved, you don't forget to subscribe and share your thoughts below. We read every single comment and love hearing your reactions to each twist and turn. Thank you for listening. This has been a story from Revenge Hour. We'll see you next time.